In the rolling Kentucky hills, where dawn's vapor still hangs over abandoned fields, lie the decaying vestiges of Pleasant Hill, a Shaker settlement that vanished without warning in 1834. Over 300 residents simply disappeared, leaving behind a haunting stillness and hollowed structures that locals still avoid after sunset. For nearly 2 centuries, Kentucky has kept the official archives under seal, hidden in vaults that few dare to investigate. However, recently unearthed testimonies from an Ohio inspector expose a reality so gruesome it shatters our understanding of historic religious life. The events at Pleasant Hill were not merely a misfortune. They represented 27 years of systematic oppression masked by spiritual fervor. Before we reveal the grim secrets that the state worked so hard to bury, I have a request. This channel is specifically for those with the courage to look into the darker corners of the American past. If you are among those who seek these suppressed truths, please subscribe and share in the comments which state you are watching from. Now, let us travel back to see how one family's avarice turned a holy sanctuary into something far more predatory. What began in 1807 as a lighthouse of purity would become one of Kentucky's most shielded scandals, masterminded by a clan whose corruption was absolute. The year was 1807, and the Second Great Awakening was tearing through Kentucky with religious intensity. Amidst this fervor, Pleasant Hill was established as a refuge for those following Shaker ideals: celibacy, shared assets, and isolation from worldly sin. Located in the lush bluegrass region near Harrodsburg, it drew hundreds of converts who surrendered their life's earnings for the hope of divine perfection. At the center of this pious facade was the Richardson family, whose reach touched every part of the commune. Elder Samuel Richardson, a towering figure with sharp gray eyes and a commanding pulpit presence, arrived from Ohio claiming a direct lineage to the original Shaker disciples. His polished look, clad in spotless Shaker attire, combined with an immense knowledge of Scripture, convinced even the most cynical visitors of his sincerity. His wife, Sister Martha, publicly ended their marriage to adhere to Shaker celibacy rules while secretly maintaining their union within Samuel's private chambers. Martha had an uncanny talent for identifying the insecurities of others, a tool she used to manipulate the group's social structure. Her quiet voice and soft smile hid a cold intelligence that left rivals both scared and mesmerized. Their influence spread through the community like ancient roots. Their firstborn, brother Ezekiel, used his father's powerful presence to oversee the settlement's massive farms. He shifted Pleasant Hill from simple survival farming into a major commercial force in the Ohio River Valley. His younger brother, Caleb, acted as the secret police, monitoring private letters and talk with a precision that would rival modern surveillance. Sister Rebecca, the oldest daughter, managed the women's quarters and new arrivals. At 28, she channeled her intensity into molding female members. Her skill at deconstructing a person's psyche and rebuilding it to fit family needs was feared by all who underwent her spiritual counseling. The youngest, Sister Patience, handled the community's records. Despite her youth, she was a master of forgery, capable of mimicking any handwriting after only a few days of study, a skill used to create the fake documents that kept the family safe from the law. Samuel's brother, Jeremiah, ran the profitable furniture shops. A skilled artisan, he maintained the high standards that made Shaker furniture famous, yet his workshop was less a place of craft and more a forced labor camp for 50 workers. Their cousin, Isaiah, managed a seed business across 3 states, using his frequent travels to mask darker activities that would have terrified his clients. Martha's sister, Hannah Collins, controlled the kitchens. By managing the community's diet, the family could reward the obedient or punish the rebellious with scientific accuracy, as Hannah was an expert in the effects of various herbs on the human mind and body. Even the elders participated. Samuel's mother, Sarah, served as a living icon of Shaker history to grant the family legitimacy, while secretly acting as the strategic brain behind their long-term schemes. The youngest brother, Nathan, managed external affairs. His charm successfully convinced the local sheriff, William Morrison, that Pleasant Hill was a perfect religious model. Nathan's frequent gifts to local organizations bought a wall of protection for the family. Visitors were often stunned by the pristine limestone buildings and the perfectly kept gardens, maintained by members who worked from sunrise to sunset. To an outsider, the 400 residents seemed content, with no visible signs of the terror within. What they couldn't see was the intricate net of control the Richardsons had woven. Every detail of life was funneled to Samuel and Martha during their secret nightly meetings. No decision was made without their seal, no member could walk the grounds alone, and even short trips to the nearby town required an armed family guard and an airtight excuse. The clan had constructed an environment that modern experts would define as a flawlessly totalitarian regime. Knowledge was strictly top-down, flowing only from the leaders, while constant monitoring ensured any sign of disagreement was immediately spotted and suppressed. The settlement's isolation, both physically and mentally, made the idea of defiance feel not just useless, but entirely unimaginable to the majority of the flock. Prospective members were put through a rigorous indoctrination ritual designed to erase their old identities and reconstruct their souls to meet the Richardsons' standards. This transformation, managed mostly by Rebecca and Martha Richardson, usually lasted half a year. By the end, converts had been psychologically molded into passive servants who equated questioning the family with blasphemy against the divine. The daily schedule served to cement this dominance at every hour. Members were awakened at 4:30 a.m. by Brother Caleb's signaling bell, consumed meals prepared under Hannah Collins' careful watch, and spent their hours at labor specifically organized to stifle private talk or independent thought. Nightly worship, directed by Samuel Richardson with his relatives in supporting roles, blended authentic liturgy with refined mental coercion that fostered total reliance and strangled critical analysis. The first sign of trouble in Pleasant Hill's polished facade surfaced on a bitter February dawn in 1812. Brother Thomas Whitman, a formerly prosperous trader who had surrendered his entire fortune to the sect 5 years prior, began posing uncomfortable questions regarding the group's bookkeeping during a town hall gathering. Brother Thomas had joined Pleasant Hill in 1807 as one of its most prominent and charitable early converts. A widower in his 50s who had lost his children to a cholera plague, he had sought solace in the Shaker vow of a spiritual family and a celestial mission. His gift of a flourishing dry goods firm and vast land assets had provided much of the initial wealth that allowed the Richardsons to build their empire on such a massive scale. For 5 years, Thomas was the quintessential Shaker. He worked tirelessly in Ezekiel's fields, guided younger members, and never doubted his superiors. His shift from a wealthy merchant to a modest brother fascinated onlookers and bolstered the community's claim of holy sincerity. However, Thomas's professional history made him uniquely capable of spotting errors that others missed. His sharp eye for ledger details, coupled with access to certain logistical papers through his farm work, slowly uncovered contradictions that burdened his soul. The profits from the seed business reported by Brother Isaiah did not align with the figures Thomas calculated while visiting client farms. The income from the carpentry shop seemed suspiciously inflated based on the actual output he witnessed. Most confusingly, the official headcount of the community did not match the consumption logs he kept for livestock feed and basic supplies. "Brothers and sisters," Thomas declared, rising during the monthly assembly, his calloused hands clutching sheets of meticulously tallied data, "I have been seeking guidance on matters that weigh heavily upon me. While our holy home has flourished, I find discrepancies in our bookkeeping that disturb my spirit." The resulting quiet was chilling. Throughout the crowded hall, Richardson family members swapped brief looks that spoke volumes without a single word. Samuel Richardson's expression stayed calm, his hands resting quietly, but those familiar with him saw a faint tensing around his gaze. Sister Martha's soft smile remained fixed, though her fingers turned white as she squeezed her prayer book. Regarding the seed trade, Thomas continued, his voice growing bolder, Brother Isaiah noted a profit of $800 from our Ohio clients last season. Yet, when I made deliveries to those same locations, my own sales tallies suggested the total should be closer to $1,200. Where has the difference been diverted? Brother Caleb Richardson stood up from his post by the entrance, pretending to check the vents, but he effectively blocked Thomas from the door. Sister Rebecca stared at Thomas, mentally cataloging his every twitch for later scrutiny. Elsewhere in the room, other family members shifted their weight, creating a nearly invisible net of physical and mental control. Furthermore, Thomas insisted, seemingly unaware of the peril he was inviting, our rolls list 400 people, yet our kitchen logs suggest we are only feeding roughly 250. Jeremiah's shop claims 50 workers, but I only see 37 at the benches. These figures do not reconcile. As protectors of God's gifts, shouldn't we expect honesty in our math? The retort came not from the leader, but from Mother Sarah Richardson, whose aged voice rang out with unexpected power. Brother Thomas, she said, her tone a mix of soft rebuke and sharp warning, your worries reveal a heart still chained to the logic of the world. In this holy place, we trust that our shepherds, led by the Almighty, handle all earthly business for our spiritual gain. Perhaps you require a period of solitude and prayer to banish these shadows from your faith. Samuel Richardson nodded with gravity, projecting fatherly pity for a lost soul. Brother Thomas, your concern for our home is touching, but it seems your mind is clouded by ghosts of your former life. Sister Hannah, will you brew Brother Thomas a cup of your special herbal tea? He needs quiet to purge his mind of these dark thoughts. The assembly lasted another hour, but Thomas Whitman's intervention had permanently shifted the air. Other members refused to look at him, suddenly preoccupied with their clothing or books. The family's subsequent actions that evening carried a hidden malice that had never been there before. That night, Thomas was discovered lifeless in his dormitory quarters by Sister Rebecca, who happened upon the body during her customary evening rounds of the men's building. Her sobbing announcement to the assembled flock framed the death as a tranquil departure. She claimed Brother Thomas had slipped away in his sleep, summoned home by the Almighty after repenting for his sins of skepticism during his final prayers. Her narrative suggested his last breath was an apology for permitting material worries to obscure his holy path. The commune accepted this version, with the submissive conviction they had been trained to hold. After all, doubting the leadership's account of reality was perceived as doubting the divine plan itself. The funeral held the next afternoon served as a sermon on the perils of letting commerce obstruct spiritual obedience. However, young Sister Mary Caldwell, tasked with the morning cleaning of the dorms, spotted peculiarities that would linger in her mind for a lifetime. Entering the room to strip the bedding, she was hit by a sharp, bitter scent of almonds that persisted even though the windows had remained open through the night. Thomas's fingernails had taken on a bizarre blue tint she had never witnessed on any other deceased person, not even her own grandfather. Most alarming was the faint white residue around Thomas's lips that Sister Rebecca had meticulously cleaned away before raising the alarm. Mary watched with hidden dread as Brother Caleb Richardson seized every scrap of Thomas's papers, including the financial tallies that had sparked the discord. Those records, along with his personal logs and letters, were cast into the great communal hearth that night during what Samuel Richardson labeled a cleansing rite to strip worldly stains from their holy ground. The group's response proved the absolute grip the Richardsons held over both information and emotion. Within hours of the death, Sister Martha was presiding over prayer circles where participants confessed their own secret doubts, fostering a climate where questioning a superior was synonymous with a spiritual rot. Brother Ezekiel initiated grueling labor shifts that kept potential skeptics occupied from sunrise to sunset, erasing any opportunity for private dialogue or quiet thought. Brother Jeremiah steered evening debates on the hazards of defying holy authority, using Thomas as a grim example of what occurs when faith falters and secular greed poisons a pure heart. These meetings, which became a staple of colony life, served the dual role of stifling future rebellion while identifying which members might still harbor dangerous ideas. The most terrifying part of the family's reaction was the speed at which Thomas Whitman's memory was erased. His belongings were handed out to others within days, his duties reassigned, and his name struck from all records except for a single death notice. It was as if he had never walked among them, his inquiries silenced, and his valid worries branded as the delusions of a materialistic mind. The months following the incident, a systematic pattern took hold that would persist for over 20 years, becoming more refined and merciless with every use. Individuals who asked pointed questions about money, voiced a wish to see relatives outside the gate, or showed a desire to depart Pleasant Hill began to suffer what the Richardsons called a spiritual emergency, requiring intervention. Brother Jeremiah Richardson created what was known as the retreat system to manage such dissenters. When a member displayed signs of independence, they were moved to isolated cabins hidden deep within the community's vast acreage for specialized prayer and fasting. These retreats, always overseen by a member of the Richardson clan, were marketed as a chance for lost souls to find their way back through meditation and solitude. These structures, built in the most secluded corners of the thousands of acres, were designed to look rustic while functioning as high-security cells. Each contained a single room with heavy shutters that barred from the outside and doors that could only be locked from the exterior. Their locations, reached only by thin trails through thick woods, ensured that no sound from within would ever reach the main village. Brother Caleb Richardson oversaw the surveillance required to fill these retreats. His web of spies throughout the settlement tracked private talks, watched friendships blossom, and screened all mail for hints of treachery or free thought. His tactics were so seamless that most never knew they were being tracked, viewing their run-ins with Caleb as mere luck rather than a planned dragnet. The criteria for these retreats were specific. New converts who asked too much about their old lives were prime targets, as were long-term members whose rising influence threatened the family's power. Those who showed too much attachment to the wealth they had donated, expressed homesickness, or built close bonds that could lead to organized resistance also found themselves sent away for spiritual healing. Sister Hannah Collins managed the community's mail with terrifying brilliance, ensuring that concerned families on the outside received beautifully written letters explaining a loved one's sudden exit or death. Her penmanship was perfect, and she had studied the handwriting of every member with scientific rigor, allowing her to forge final letters that would appease distant relatives for decades. Hannah's forgery operation was a massive undertaking. She kept files on every member's history, including samples of their script and details about their pre-conversion lives. When a member was marked for removal, Hannah would draft a series of letters to be mailed over months, simulating a life that no longer existed. Parents in Ohio read tender notes from children they would never actually see again, claiming they had been called to missionary work in the far west. Relatives in Pennsylvania received detailed accounts of peaceful deaths from brief fevers, including descriptions of final prayers and graveside services that never took place. These letters were psychological masterpieces designed to offer closure while preventing any outside investigation. Meanwhile, Brother Isaiah Richardson's seed firm provided the ideal cover for removing physical evidence and managing the colony's reputation with the outside world. His recurring journeys to secluded farmsteads provided the perfect chance to inter bodies in isolated spots throughout Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee, while he simultaneously managed a legitimate trade that bolstered his image as a reliable businessman and pious Shaker disciple. Isaiah's travel plans were meticulously structured to fulfill several goals at once. His real clients served as cover for his presence in far-flung areas, while his intimate knowledge of secluded rural lands, gained through years of commercial networking, allowed him to pinpoint burial grounds that would remain eternally hidden. He fostered ties with lonely farmers who prized his company and never questioned his frequent pleas to stay the night on their land when weather turned poor. The disposal of remains was systematic and professional. Victims were moved in custom-built seed carriages that appeared to hold standard farm goods, but featured secret chambers for their gruesome freight. Because of Isaiah's known dedication to his schedule, his overnight stays were never doubted by clients who assumed he was merely keeping up with his heavy workload. When local law enforcement occasionally asked about missing persons, they were presented with flawless logs managed by Sister Patience Richardson. Her filing system was a masterclass in official fraud, proving through forged paperwork that people had either departed willingly for different communes or had perished from natural ailments and received a proper burial in the village graveyard. Patience's record-keeping went far deeper than simple name lists. She kept thorough medical logs that could justify sudden deaths, travel permits that backed claims of members leaving for faraway settlements, and correspondence files consisting of both real mail and Hannah's forgeries. Her bureaucratic precision ensured that any formal probe could be met with persuasive documentation capable of surviving a standard check. The mental grip the Richardson clan held was perhaps more horrifying than their physical atrocities. They had built a closed loop where doubting the leaders was synonymous with spiritual ruin, where unquestioning submission was the ultimate goal, and where followers monitored one another's inner thoughts and outer actions. Those remaining in the group were not merely victims. They had been molded into unwitting partners in their own subjugation. The village headcount stayed constant at roughly 400 people, despite a steady influx of new converts every month and the mysterious exits that happened with growing regularity. This equilibrium was achieved through what Brother Caleb privately termed natural selection, the methodical purging of anyone threatening the family's rule, offset by the relentless luring of new members whose property gifts funded the expansion of the enterprise. Incoming members were strictly vetted by the Richardson women, who had created advanced techniques for spotting potential rebels before they could stir the flock. Sister Rebecca's initial meetings, framed as spiritual guidance, actually functioned to gauge each convert's mental state, social ties, and economic worth. Those seen as a risk were slated for early removal, while those deemed useful underwent a harsh indoctrination meant to wipe away their former selves. This brainwashing process, perfected over years, merged true spiritual practice with systematic mental torment to create trauma bonds between the sufferers and their captors. New arrivals were cut off from the outside world and put through alternating cycles of intense praise and cold neglect, shattering their mental walls and making them crave the approval of their masters. By 1825, Pleasant Hill functioned as a precise engine of victimization. Its different parts worked together with a clockwork efficiency that would have stunned any management expert. The Richardsons had sharpened their tactics over 18 years, turning what began as random crimes into a sophisticated criminal network that yielded massive wealth while protecting an untarnished public image. The family's internal roles had shifted into a complex hierarchy that heightened productivity while lowering danger. Samuel Richardson stayed in his position as the spiritual figurehead, giving moving speeches that lured in new blood and kept current members looking toward the afterlife rather than their current misery. His magnetic aura had become legendary in Kentucky's faith circles, with outside ministers often pointing to Pleasant Hill as a shining example of successful holy living. Martha Richardson had turned psychological coercion into a science, studying every member with the focus of a scientist observing a specimen. Her techniques for crushing personal resistance and rebuilding minds to suit the family had become so streamlined that the change usually took only 3 to 4 months. She kept thorough mental profiles on everyone, updating them constantly with data from her network of female spies. The settlement's growth allowed for more advanced criminal schemes that produced various streams of wealth. Brother Ezekiel's farm works now sent goods to major markets in Louisville, Lexington, and Cincinnati, making massive profits that were never recorded in the community's official books. His team of unpaid laborers, kept in line through mental pressure rather than chains, allowed for labor savings that made Pleasant Hill's farms impossibly lucrative. Brother Jeremiah's carpentry shops had likewise grown, crafting items sold across the Ohio River Valley as genuine shaker work. The craftsmanship stayed excellent because Jeremiah truly knew his trade, but the labor was effectively slavery masked as holy work. His craftsmen labored 12 to 14 hours a day on furniture that commanded high prices, with every cent going into the Richardsons' secret accounts. Most horrific was the way the family began selling their own members to buyers who ran plantations and factories throughout the South and Midwest. This trafficking ring, organized mainly by Brother Isaiah during his seed deliveries, offered the highest returns of any family venture while providing a convenient reason for the sudden disappearances that might have otherwise raised alarms. The choice of who to sell followed a cold logic. Younger members with useful skills but a streak of independence were the first targets, as were those whose family ties might make their presence in the village a liability. The purchasers, who were led to believe they were acquiring indentured laborers rather than free citizens, paid significant amounts for workers accompanied by forged papers intended to prove their voluntary service. Sister Rebecca Richardson had evolved into the clan's primary expert in breaking down new initiates and determining which specific fate awaited them. Her psychological vetting, masked as spiritual mentorship, allowed her to sort newcomers into distinct categories: high-value long-term residents who would stay at Pleasant Hill, potential victims for trafficking who could be bartered for cash, and high-risk individuals who required immediate removal. Rebecca's tactics merged genuine religious instruction with methodical cruelty, fostering intense trauma bonds between the sufferers and their tormentors. She had analyzed the conversion rituals of legitimate shaker groups and then corrupted those methods to serve the family's illicit goals. Her sessions resulted in converts becoming mentally reliant on her validation while severing their ties to their former identities and past connections. The settlement's seclusion had become both physical and mental, with followers living in a restricted information bubble where the Richardson clan dictated every bit of data and its meaning. Situated on thousands of acres of family-owned territory, residents seldom met outsiders except during tightly controlled trips to local towns. Even those short outings were overseen by Richardson relatives who tracked every interaction and logged any talk that hinted at rebellion. The family had built deep ties with regional leaders that shielded them from government oversight. Sheriff William Morrison of Mercer County had essentially become a bankrolled partner, accepting steady contributions to his political and personal funds in exchange for the pretense that Pleasant Hill was an exemplary holy site that required protection rather than scrutiny. These alliances reached throughout the local hierarchy of power. Brother Nathan Richardson's strategic charm had secured friends among local shopkeepers, lawmakers, and church heads who saw Pleasant Hill as a crucial economic and religious pillar for the region. The community's lawful businesses generated significant tax money and jobs, making regional officials hesitant to act on whispers or accusations. The mental traps had grown to include complex rituals and rites that deepened member reliance while identifying potential rebels. Samuel Richardson's services blended authentic Shaker tradition with nuanced psychological pressure that induced altered mental states where logical thinking became impossible. These gatherings often went on for hours, leaving the flock emotionally drained and highly susceptible to mental control. Evening confessionals, overseen by different Richardson family members, served several functions beyond spiritual help. They offered a way to spot members holding onto doubts or anger, used shame and guilt to force public agreement, and allowed the clan to harvest intel on private friendships and talks that might challenge their rule. The admission process had become highly specialized, with family members focusing on different types of intelligence. Sister Rebecca looked for emotional bonds that might fuel resistance, while Brother Caleb searched for practical threats like getaway plans or attempts to contact the law. Sister Hannah focused on mentions of outside relatives who might become a nuisance if they began looking for their missing kin. Mother Sarah Richardson, despite her frail appearance, had become the family's primary strategist, using her long history of manipulation to direct their future moves. Her talent for appearing harmless while managing intricate criminal schemes had become legendary within the family, where they privately called her the General in honor of her tactical genius. Sarah's reach touched every part of the business, from picking new lands for expansion to creating advanced mental control methods. Her grasp of human psychology, honed through 7 decades of using others, allowed her to anticipate how people would react to specific threats or rewards. Her vision had shifted the family's criminal work from random theft into a permanent business structure that could, in theory, last forever. As they grew, they required more advanced security to hide their actions. The family had built complex communication webs that allowed them to coordinate across their many ventures while avoiding detection. They utilized coded terminology and letters, ran separate bank ledgers for different businesses, and established fake identities for use in case they had to flee quickly. The start of the collapse for the Richardsons' 27-year reign of terror began with a surprise turn of events. Their very success had drawn the gaze of the real Shaker leadership in Ohio. In the tail end of 1833, the Ohio Union of Shaker Communities voted to send Elder Joseph Meacham, one of their most seasoned and revered elders, to inspect Pleasant Hill for possible entry into their official network of verified Shaker towns. Elder Meacham was unlike any visitor the Richardsons had dealt with before. As a true follower of Mother Ann Lee's teachings who had lived for 40 years in Shaker towns across New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, he held a deep understanding of real Shaker habits, filing, and social order that made him nearly impossible to trick. His goal was to confirm that Pleasant Hill actually practiced true Shaker ideals before he would endorse them for official status and a seat in the union's leadership circle. This request for an audit followed years of glowing news about the town's spiritual growth and financial health. The Ohio leaders had been swayed by reports of the group's expansion, their high-quality products, and their supposed success in upholding vows of celibacy and shared property for over 20 years. The choice to send Meacham was both a mark of respect and a lethal threat to the Richardsons' carefully maintained facade. Samuel Richardson initially greeted the news with fake joy, certain that the family's theater would trick yet another religious figure. After all, they had successfully misled hundreds of guests over the decades, including priests from other faiths who had left Pleasant Hill entirely convinced of its holy truth. The clan's history of handling audits had filled them with certainty that they could dominate the process and steer Meacham's findings to their advantage. However, Meacham's initial demands immediately set off alarms across the Richardson hierarchy. Unlike previous guests who were satisfied with choreographed tour and hollow displays of village life, Meacham insisted on inspecting financial ledgers dating back to the settlement's 1807 inception. He demanded private dialogue with randomly chosen followers without any Richardson relative present to supervise or coach them. Most alarming of all, he carried his own bookkeeping tools and intended to cross-reference Pleasant Hill's claimed population with their supply logs, manufacturing output, and mail registers. The depth of Meacham's probe became evident during his primary conference with Samuel Richardson, held in the Central Hall before a crowd of elder members. "Brother Samuel," Meacham stated in his soft but commanding tone, "the Ohio Union utilizes specific protocols for vetting candidate towns. We must examine your membership lists, fiscal books, mail files, and death logs for the last 5 years. We also require private sessions with at least 50 residents chosen by a blind draw." Samuel's reply showed the first sign of his typical confidence fracturing. Elder Meacham, we are grateful for your visit and keen to show our devotion to Mother Anne's way. Yet, our bookkeeping follows Kentucky customs that might vary from Ohio's rules. Perhaps a more casual review would better suit our specific situation. Meacham's face stayed calm but unyielding. I recognize your local habits, Brother Samuel, but Union rules apply to every town regardless of its map coordinates. True Shaker ways are constant and not changed by region. We will start with the member lists and death logs tomorrow at dawn. That night, the Richardsons convened a desperate meeting in Samuel's inner room, their tones low but their terror obvious to any eavesdropper. Mother Sarah Richardson, despite her physical weakness, directed the strategy with the poise of a seasoned crisis manager. This man understands details we cannot simulate, she hissed. He is seeking proof we cannot offer without revealing the whole truth. We must stall, mislead, and if required, remove the danger before his work is done. Brother Isaiah was the first to voice the depth of their peril. He wants 5 years of records, but our crimes go back decades. The population count alone will fail us. Our ledgers claim 400 people, but barely 250 actually live here. The death logs are even worse. We have burial records for people who supposedly moved to other towns. Sister Hannah Collins pointed out another frightening problem. He has already spotted errors in the letters I've been faking for other settlements. He knows Shaker writing rules I never learned. He's asking about Mother Lee's theology that our people can't answer because they were never actually taught. The family's early tries at stalling and misdirecting Meacham only heightened his doubts and fueled his drive to find the truth. When they argued that specific logs were lost in a storm-damaged shed, he noted that no building on the property showed a single missing shingle. When they tried to handpick members to testify to their goodness, he remained firm on choosing subjects through a random lottery of the full roster. Brother Caleb's spy ring, so gifted at tracking the flock, was useless against a professional who knew how to maintain operational secrecy. Meacham shifted his schedule, held talks in varying rooms, and seemed to instinctively know when he was being shadowed. His questions during member sessions showed a mastery of true Shaker life that made their lies impossible to sustain. Most perilously, some of the surviving residents began to react to Meacham's genuine holy aura in ways that terrified the Richardsons. Sister Mary Caldwell, who had seen Brother Thomas Whitman's suspicious end 20 years ago, felt moved by Meacham's sincerity and began to whisper her long-held secrets about those who had vanished. The mental impact of Meacham's presence on the followers was massive and swift. For the first time in an age, they met a man whose holy power was not built on terror, lies, or mental cruelty. His kind inquiries about their lives, his obvious expertise in Shaker ways, and his real worry for their souls created a space where buried doubts and old memories started to rise. Brother Jeremiah found his carpentry teams becoming distracted as they talked with Meacham about historic Shaker building methods they had never been shown. These talks exposed voids in their training that proved they were not receiving true Shaker instruction. Sister Rebecca's iron-fisted dormitory rule began to crack as women started asking about rituals they had never heard of before Meacham came. Her power, absolute for so long, suddenly looked weak compared to the visitor's gentle soul and deep knowledge. The inquiry turned a corner when Meacham asked to visit the village graveyard for a quiet prayer service for the dead. The Richardsons could not deny such a basic holy request without looking guilty, but they could not let him see the burial site too closely without risking total exposure. Brother Caleb offered to lead Meacham to the cemetery, hopping to distract him and hurry the process. But Meacham's professional eye immediately caught flaws that had gone unnoticed for years. The burial layouts did not fit the death dates in the books, and the state of the markers suggested many more bodies than the official logs allowed for. Brother Caleb, Meacham whispered among the stones, I see flaws in your logs. This marker says Brother William died in 1829, yet your mail files show letters from him in 1830. How do you explain this? Caleb's reply showed the panic taking over the clan. Elder Meacham, perhaps our records are flawed. Sister Patience keeps many files, but even the best clerk can make a mistake with so many people over so much time. Meacham looked thoughtful but unconvinced. I know record-keeping is hard, but Shaker towns usually keep perfect logs of deaths and moves. These flaws look like a system problem rather than a few errors. That night, Meacham made a discovery that would rip the mask off the Richardson crimes and end their nearly three-decade reign. On the evening of March 15, 1834, the elder found the proof he needed. Driven by his rising fears about the contradictions found over 3 weeks of work, he chose to walk the cemetery by moonlight to compare the logs to the actual ground, without a Richardson watching him. What he found was a graveyard telling two opposing stories. The public cemetery, kept tidy for guests and audits, held about 40 graves with fine stones dated from 1807 to 1834. The markers were expertly made, costly, and set in clean rows that suggested order. But Meacham's sharp eyes, honed by 40 years of running real Shaker towns, spotted telltale signs in the dirt that revealed a much darker truth. Patches throughout the yard showed faint dips and different soil shades that suggested far more burials than the stones claimed. The soil in these unmarked zones had been moved and left to sink, creating faint hollows that a casual passerby would miss, but were blatant to an expert on the evolution of graveyards. The local flora also betrayed the deception. Specific patches produced different plant varieties than the surrounding earth, signaling ground that had been repeatedly dug up and replaced. Even more terrifying, as Meacham scrutinized the dated headstones, he realized many recorded death dates matched his records of people who had supposedly left the settlement to start new colonies or visit kin. The chronology was physically impossible. How could a resident pass away and be interred at Pleasant Hill on the very day they were logged as traveling to Tennessee or Ohio? His methodical review of every stone exposed a fraudulent scheme so intricate it proved years of cold planning. Individuals who supposedly succumbed to illness were buried alongside those who had allegedly moved away for mission work. These dates formed a ledger of systematic murder that aligned perfectly with times when the clan faced internal rebellion or external curiosity. Meacham's investigation was cut short by Sister Mary Caldwell, who had been peering from her dormitory and saw a chance to finally disclose the truth she had guarded for 20 years. Gliding through the shadows, she reached the graveyard with the frantic bravery of a woman who knew this was her final hope to expose the nightmare. "Elder Meacham," she hissed urgently as she neared his lantern's glow. "Heaven has sent you to reveal the horrors we've been too paralyzed to speak of. What you see here is just a fraction of the Richardson family's crimes." In a dialogue held in low tones among the silent markers, Mary exposed the brutal reality she had lived in for decades. "I've watched them bury neighbors in the dead of night," she confessed, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and long-overdue catharsis. "The Richardsons don't just lead this place. They systematically kill anyone who questions their bank accounts or challenges their rule." Mary's account, shared in broken whispers while they ducked between stones to remain hidden, described a level of elimination that went beyond simple crowd control. The Richardsons had essentially established a death camp under the guise of a church, where anyone who doubted the math, missed their home, showed potential for leadership, or simply witnessed too much was methodically purged. "Sister Hannah Collins stores poisons in the pantry," Mary revealed, her words rushing out with the speed of a dam breaking. "I've seen her fix special meals for those who asked too many questions. Brother Thomas Whitman was far from the first. He was just the first one who gave me the courage to actually see what was happening." The full width of the criminal web became undeniable as Mary continued her confession. "Brother Caleb knows who wants to leave before they even pack. He reads private mail and spies at bedroom doors. He keeps a list of problems, and they vanish within days of being named. Brother Jeremiah," she added, looking back toward the main buildings to check for watchers. "He's the one who moves the bodies. He has burial pits all over Kentucky that he uses during his furniture runs. I've seen him loading wagons under the cover of night and returning with empty beds and dirt packed under his nails." The most chilling disclosure involved the family's human trafficking ring, which sold younger, healthy residents to plantations and factories as indentured labor. They don't kill every dissenter, she clarified. The strong ones are sold. Brother Isaiah's seed trade is a front. He's delivering human cargo to buyers across the South. Meacham realized Pleasant Hill wasn't just a fallen Shaker town. It was a criminal enterprise that had never been legitimately Shaker at all. Mary's memory of the early days suggested the Richardsons had likely murdered the original founders in 1808 and stolen their identities to inherit a colony of trusting followers. "The real Samuel died a year after we started," she whispered. "I was a girl then, but I remember him being different, more focused on our souls than on money. The man using his name today is a total stranger." The impact of Mary's words hit Meacham with crushing weight. For a quarter century, the Richardsons had been committing mass murder while erasing the authentic Shaker legacy of Pleasant Hill. They had twisted holy seeking into a tool for profit, turning people's deepest faith into a weapon against them. As daybreak neared, Meacham faced a choice that would decide the fate of the 250 remaining residents. If he confronted the family now, he would surely be their next victim, and the only outside witness would be gone. But if he fled for help, the family might purge all remaining witnesses before the law arrived. The burden of 300 lives lost and 250 still trapped weighed on him as he knelt in the dirt. Mary waited at his side, her life tied to his next move. The cemetery held its peace in the dark, a witness to decades of horror masked as piety. Meacham's choice would determine if the Richardson reign continued, or if justice would finally find Pleasant Hill. Elder Meacham's choice to escape in the early hours of March 16, 1834, taking Mary Caldwell with him, triggered the downfall of the Richardson clan. They galloped through the night to Harrodsburg, where Meacham convinced a federal marshal and Sheriff Morrison to launch a raid. Backed by Mary's testimony and Meacham's proof of fraud, the federal involvement was key, as it was later found that the sheriff had been on the family payroll for years. Captain James Crawford of the federal marshals brought 12 armed men, using a legal authority that bypassed local corruption to ensure the Richardsons couldn't hide behind their allies. The scene the law found upon returning to Pleasant Hill remains one of the darkest entries in Kentucky's history. Realizing their time was up, the Richardsons had made a frantic attempt to kill every witness and flee with their gold. Of the 250 residents alive 3 weeks earlier, only 37 were found alive. Those survivors, found padlocked in cellar storage rooms, told of the full 30-year nightmare. They had been left without sustenance for 2 days, while the family argued over whether to slaughter them all or sell the healthiest to Southern buyers before leaving the state for good. These few survivors, kept alive for their market value rather than any shred of compassion, were the living proof of the human trafficking ring. Some had already been sold to owners in Mississippi, with the money paid and the transport ready. Their stories exposed a system that had sold hundreds into slavery, while telling the world they had moved away from missionary work. The tangible evidence unearthed during the sweep validated every gruesome aspect of the survivors' accounts. Secret burial grounds were detected throughout the settlement's sprawling acreage, holding remains that bore marks of lethal poisoning, strangulation, and blunt trauma. These interments were systematically mapped, with precise diagrams found in Brother Jeremiah Richardson's shop pinpointing the site of every clandestine grave. Search parties located more than 150 unmarked burial spots hidden across the community's thousands of acres, many holding several individuals discarded during the same periods. The state of the remains, along with personal items found in the earth, verified that the Richardson clan had been methodically executing residents since at least 1812. The frequency of these killings had accelerated sharply in the final years as the family grew more arrogant in their techniques. Within the Richardsons' private rooms, agents found meticulous ledgers tracking their human trafficking business with the cold accuracy of a legitimate firm. These logs listed the identities of purchasers, the sums exchanged for specific members, and detailed physical descriptions of the merchandise. Over the last decade, this trafficking ring had netted more than $40,000, vastly outperforming their lawful commercial efforts. Perhaps the most haunting find was Martha Richardson's personal diary, which detailed the mental strategies the clan perfected to dominate their victims. Spanning 15 years, the journal recorded methodical trials in human coercion that would stun modern psychologists with their complexity and cruelty. Martha's entries showed no hint of regret for the hundreds of lives her family ruined. Instead, she wrote clinical notes on which tactics worked best for specific character types, deep dives into shattering mental defiance, and tactical blueprints for moving their enterprise into other regions. Her words portrayed a woman who saw other people as mere assets to be drained, rather than individuals worthy of kindness. The diary also held thorough mental dossiers on every resident, updated frequently with data from her network of female informants. These profiles rated each person's value as a laborer, their likelihood of rebelling, their worth as breeding stock for a future workforce, and their suitability for different modes of abuse. The Richardson family's downfall was rapid and final, though the court proceedings unveiled horrors that stunned even the most hardened lawmen. Samuel, Martha, and their 6 grown children were detained and indicted on numerous counts of homicide, abduction, embezzlement, and human trafficking. The trial, held in Frankfurt over the summer of 1834, gripped the nation as newspapers detailed the staggering breadth of their atrocities. Testimony painted a picture of calculated malice that defied the era's understanding of human wickedness. Witness after witness recounted decades of mental agony, physical torture, and clinical murder carried out with the rhythm of a corporate factory. The proof was so undeniable that the jury took only 2 hours to deliver guilty verdicts for everyone involved. All 7 Richardsons were sentenced to death, with the hangings taking place in October 1834 before massive crowds, including former residents who had fled or been sold into bondage years before. While the executions offered a sense of closure, they could not mend the stolen lives or the deep psychological scars carried by the survivors. The 37 remaining members faced the monumental task of starting over after years of abuse that had erased their identities and severed their social ties. Many struggled with what is now identified as severe post-traumatic stress, finding it impossible to trust churches, leaders, or their own intuition. Some never recovered. The systematic mental damage left them unable to live alone in society. They spent their final years in state care, plagued by the shadows of the atrocities they saw and the friends they lost to the family's cruelty. Others found the willpower to heal through genuine spiritual groups that offered mental and practical aid. The Ohio Union of Shaker Communities, under Elder Meacham, created a dedicated fund to help the Pleasant Hill survivors return to the world, offering money, vocational training, and therapy that allowed many to eventually find a degree of peace. The state of Kentucky eventually suppressed most of the Pleasant Hill files, fearing that the full truth would stain the region's image and halt religious migration to the bluegrass area. The village structures were razed under government watch, and the territory was sold to farmers who were told only that the previous group had folded due to money problems. This forced silence allowed myths and guesses to fill the void left by the facts. This strategic erasing protected the state's reputation, but meant the victims' experiences were never truly validated. Modern researchers with access to the hidden archives believe the Richardsons killed or sold more than 400 people during their 27-year reign. The true count may be higher, as their books tracked money rather than lives, and many victims may have been erased without a single trace. This dark chapter shows how easily faith can be twisted by those who master the art of control. The Richardsons thrived by preying on spiritual hunger, turning the search for God into a cage of death. The Pleasant Hill disaster is a reminder that malice often wears the mask of virtue, using the language of community to hide predatory acts. The family's long success proves why it is vital to keep religious groups connected to the wider world, preventing the total isolation where abuse grows unseen. What is your take on this account? Do you believe the full truth came out, or are there grimmer secrets still locked in Kentucky's vaults? The state's choice to keep the records classified suggests we may never know the full depth of the horror. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on what might still be hidden in those off-limits files. If you found this investigation compelling and want to see more historical mysteries, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this with a fellow history buff. I will see you in our next deep dive.